Hi, and welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take educational theory and turn it into educational practice. The topic of today's talk will be about learning styles and how you can find out how your students learn best and use that in your own classroom. Learning styles come in various forms, and the one I'm going to be talking about is Kolb's learning styles, which is broken down into 7 parts. So I'm going to talk about each of those parts and then what you can do in the classroom to make a difference with that. So the first one would be visual. Some students are better at seeing things. They see something, it sticks in their head, that this is how they learn best. And so things that you can do in the classroom is you can use images in pictures, color. I like to use PowerPoint whenever I'm giving a presentation so that students are seeing what I'm talking about. And so anytime you can present them with something visual, that is going to help this type of learner. The second type of learner is oral. This is auditory or musical. And this is someone who listens and hears and remembers things that they hear. And so in this case, this would be when you're talking to a class and you're lecturing and things. These students are going to pick up on this a lot better than students without this learning style. And so anything you can do to provide oral as well as written. So in other words, when I'm giving directions, rather than just give it in written form, I also explain it to them so those people who are auditory can get that better. So that would be an example of something that you could do in the classroom. The third one is verbal. And this is the student themselves prefer using words, both in speech and in writing. It's very important that we teach our kids how to write properly, but it's almost equally, if not more important, to teach them how to speak publicly using these words. And so a lot of times, for instance, I used to have students that would take an essay exam and they were not the strongest of writers, but I knew that they knew the material. And so what I would do is I would allow them to record their essays verbally. And so they could share what it is that they knew by talking about it, because that was their strength. And then some kids are just better at written. And so giving that opportunity. So I gave students choice on whether they could do their exams in written or oral form. And that way I could, reach both of these learning styles, parts of the learning styles. The next one is the physical or kinesthetic, and this is basically the hands-on learner. So this is the type of learner that likes to be doing, that likes to be manipulating things with their hands. And you often see this in elementary schools where kids are learning math by using manipulatives and things of that nature. You see it in science classes when they're doing labs, but I don't think that we see it enough in all classes. And so anything you can use, such as simulations that get people out of their seat and being involved in hands-on opportunities, or anytime you can do projects or case-based learning with students, that allows them to actually be involved in working with their hands and their minds to learn what it is that they need to learn. So that would be physical kinesthetic. Logical or mathematical is the fifth one, and this is kids who use logic in their thinking. Anytime that you are approaching them, you have to convince them that it's logical what it is that they're learning in order for them to be willing to learn that. And so things that you can do here is you can work in systems. So in other words, helping them to see the bigger picture by using systems in place, whether it be like setting up a project and having various steps to that project. And also is making sure that you're reasoning with them. So I always found it interesting when I would talk with a student, if I could reason with them why they shouldn't be misbehaving. A lot of times the logical type student then would see the error of their way and then stop doing it, because you just had to appeal to their logical side. And so those are things that you can be doing in the classroom to appeal to the logical. The next 2 types of learning styles are kind of an either or, so they kind of overlap the ones that I've talked about previous. First is solitary. And solitary means these are students that like to work alone. They like self-study. They like to do things themselves. And so In this case, I do try to do a mix in my classroom of group work and individual work. And even within the group work, there can be individual work that is doled out so that students can work on things individually. But even in my classroom, I try to set up spaces where kids could work individually. And sometimes students just learn better. They're self-reflective. They like to be by themselves with their own thoughts. At the same time, the other learning style, which is social, means that they prefer to work in groups. For both of these, even though there is a strength, I think there is benefits in doing both of them. So being able to be self-reflective and think about things like that makes you a problem solver, because it means you don't need anyone else to help you come up with problems, to solutions to those problems. And so when it comes to the social, though, it is important to learn how to work in groups, because you'll be collaborating with people your entire careers, whether it be, your family or people you work with or people you play, intramural softball with. You're going to have to work with people. And so having that skill is really important. So although I do feel that it's important to give options and allow kids either or, it's also important to expose them to both of them so that they can get better at each of them. So those are the 7 different types of learning styles. So what do you do in the classroom? So I talked about different strategies, but how do you find out your students' different styles? Well, there are learning inventories that you can have students take, and here's a link to one of those, where if a student were to take this online survey, it would be able to identify them what probably is their strength when it comes to learning styles. As the teacher, it's important to have awareness of these. So to keep track of what kids learn what ways. And then when you differentiate or you present choices, that you are giving them lots of choices, that they can choose things that are their strengths. So that's what you can do in the classroom as a teacher. And why is this important? There was a study in the University of Illinois regarding secondary students. And what they found was 50% of all secondary students are kinesthetic learners. They're hands-on learners. 40% of secondary school were visual learners, so they learn through images and seeing things. And only 10% were auditory, which means that they listen and they understand from listening. The problem is that 80% of secondary instruction is auditory. So you're only reaching 10% of your kids if you are going to lecture the whole time or present the whole time or talk to them the whole entire time. And so what you're missing is the visual strengths, the hands-on strengths, things of that nature. And so as a teacher, it's important that you understand this and that you are presenting lessons in lots of different varieties of ways. And that way, whatever their strength is what they can learn from. So a couple of takeaways. I'll give you 3 takeaways for learning styles. First off is mix and match the different styles with a lesson. So when I would give lecture, I always would actually have a PowerPoint that accompanied that. And that way, what they were seeing, they were also hearing. So if you were auditory, you were getting it through the spoken. If you were visual, you were seeing it in front of you. And this goes from any lesson. So try to mix in, hands-on things. Try to mix in where they're having to be logical. So mix and match these so that you're covering the gamut of learning styles that your students may have. The second thing is, as much as possible, in your classroom, try to give students choice. And try to give them choice to pick their strength. A lot of times we want students to focus on their weaknesses to get better at them. And there is some merit to that, and that is important. But at the same time, we need to be reinforcing, strengthening what are their strengths and what they're good at, because some people are just naturally better at logical, and some are just naturally better hands-on. And so you need to use that to your advantage so that they can learn. And so making sure that you give them choices so they can choose these, and understanding which is their strengths. So some students may, in their minds, think that they're very good auditory learners, but it turns out when they take a learning style inventory, it turns out that they would be hands-on instead. So it's important for them to gain an understanding of that. The third takeaway is, again, be aware and learn the different styles that your students have. So if you were teaching a class and it turns out that this year 90% of your kids are visual, but then you need to adjust your classroom to whereas a lot of the lessons that you're doing are presented in a visual fashion. The very next year, you could have a whole another set of kids, and you're 40% visual and 30% kinesthetic and 20% hands-on, or sorry, 20% auditory. And so as a result, you have to adjust your teaching. We all know that teaching is all about adjustments. You can't, I once had a teacher say to me, you can teach for 30 years or you can teach 1 year 30 times. And so you don't want to be teaching 1 year 30 times and doing the exact same lessons and not changing into the strengths of your students. Right now, there's a big push in education for personalized learning. And this is a prime example of learning where your students are in their learning styles and then presenting material to benefit their strengths so that they can learn better.